I didn't know you were that sensitive. You actually remember that.
I'm so sensitive, I really can't answer a question from someone who's not interested in the question.
I'm very interested in the question. Now, what?
For many years, Johnny Carson was seen as calm, funny, and easygoing on late-night TV. People at home enjoyed his shows, and many guests felt happy to sit with him. But behind that friendly smile, there was another side that only a few people knew about. Some stars did not earn his respect at all. In fact, there was one name he truly disliked more than the others. Whenever that person came on the show, the mood would change. Things felt tense, and the easy laughter was not the same. So what really caused this strong feeling? And why did Carson react this way? Join us in this video as we reveal the details. Johnny Carson utterly despised him. Johnny Carson spent most of his life in front of cameras. But what made him truly powerful was not just what people saw, it was what he noticed. Night after night, for decades, he sat across from some of the biggest names in entertainment. He listened, he watched, and more importantly, he studied people. He had a quiet way of reading through charm, through rehearsed stories, and through carefully built public images. That ability made him respected, but it also made him cautious. He did not easily accept what he was shown. Even when he smiled and laughed on screen, there was always a part of him that stayed alert, always watching for something that did not quite feel right. When James Stewart came onto his show, Carson behaved exactly as expected. He welcomed him warmly. He smiled. He engaged in conversation that seemed easy and natural. To the audience, it looked like two respected men enjoying each other's company. Nothing felt out of place. But behind that calm performance, Carson felt something very different. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a quiet sense of doubt that kept returning every time Stewart appeared. Carson could not ignore it, even though he never showed it openly. According to those who worked closely with him, Carson would react differently when Stewart's name came up. His expression would change slightly. His tone would shift. He would question the booking in a way he did not do with most guests. It was not anger, at least not at first. It was uncomfortable, a feeling that something about Stewart did not match the image everyone else believed. Carson had built his career on authenticity, or at least the search for it. He did not like anything that felt forced or overly controlled. He respected honesty, even when it was messy. But what he saw in Stewart, or what he believed he saw, felt too perfect, too smooth, too carefully arranged. Over time, that feeling grew stronger. It was no longer just a passing thought. It became something he carried with him whenever Stewart was mentioned. He continued to do his job, of course. He remained professional. He treated Stewart with the same courtesy he showed others. But internally, his opinion had already started to change. Part of what influenced Carson was the kind of information he had access to. He was not just a host. He was connected to people behind the scenes, people who had been in the industry for years, people who had seen things that never made it into public view. These quiet conversations shaped how he understood certain figures, including Stewart. He began to hear details that did not align with the public image. Small things at first, stories that suggested a gap between who Stewart appeared to be and how he actually lived. Carson did not react immediately. He listened, he observed, he compared what he heard with what he saw on stage. And the more he watched, the more that gap seemed real to him. What made this situation unusual was how well it was hidden. To everyone else, Stewart remained the same trusted figure. His reputation did not change. His appearances continued to be well received. The audience saw warmth and sincerity. They saw the same man they had always admired. But Carson saw something else. He saw someone who, in his view, was playing a role even when the cameras were not rolling. And that idea, that someone could maintain such a strong image while hiding something different underneath, did not sit well with him. Still, he kept it to himself. He did not challenge Stewart on air. He did not expose anything. He simply carried that quiet judgment with him. allowing it to shape how he felt, even if it never changed how he acted in public. And as the years went on, that feeling did not fade. Instead, it became stronger, more settled, more certain in his mind. What started as a small doubt slowly turned into something deeper, something more personal. If Johnny Carson had only quiet doubts at first, what really happened that pushed him past suspicion and into a level of discomfort he could no longer ignore when it came to James Stewart? Let's find out. The moment doubt turned into disgust. For Johnny Carson, there was a clear difference between suspicion and conviction. At first, his feelings about James Stewart were uncertain. He noticed things. He questioned things. But he did not fully commit to those thoughts. He remained open, at least to some degree. That changed over time. As Carson continued to hear more about Stewart's private life, especially his role as a father, his view became more fixed. What disturbed him was not just the idea of a hidden truth. It was the idea that this hidden truth stood in direct contrast to the image Stewart presented to the world. Stewart was widely seen as a devoted family man. He spoke about values, about responsibility, about the importance of being a good father. These ideas were not just part of his personal life, they were part of his public identity. People believed them because they trusted him. But Carson began to hear a different story. He heard that Stewart's connection with his adopted sons was distant, that he was not as involved as people thought, that there was a lack of warmth that did not match the image he projected. These details, whether fully accurate or not, shaped Carson's perception in a powerful way. For Carson, this was not a small issue. It was not something that could be easily dismissed. To him, it suggested a kind of inconsistency that he found difficult to accept. He believed that if someone built their identity around certain values, those values should be visible in their private life as well. The turning point came after the loss of Stewart's son during the Vietnam War. It was a tragic event, one that naturally drew public sympathy. When Stewart spoke about the loss, when he shared his grief, many people were deeply moved. One of the most memorable moments came when Stewart appeared on television and read a poem, his voice breaking, his emotions clearly visible. The audience responded strongly. It felt real to them. It felt honest. But Carson saw that moment in a completely different way. To him, it did not feel genuine. It felt controlled. It felt, in his view, like something carefully delivered, almost like a performance. That reaction stayed with him long after the show ended. It was not just disappointment. It was something stronger. That was the moment when Carson's doubt turned into something deeper, something closer to disgust. What affected him most was the belief that something deeply personal, something deeply painful, might have been used to support a public image. That idea crossed a line for him. It was not about acting anymore. It was about authenticity, about truth, about whether what people saw could be trusted. From that point on, Carson's opinion of Stewart did not change. Even though he continued to treat him with respect in public, his private view remained firm. He no longer questioned whether something was off. In his mind, he had already reached a conclusion. And yet, he never spoke about it openly. He never revealed what he believed or what he had heard. He kept it hidden, just as the image he questioned remained intact. In the end, the situation was defined by silence. Carson held his views quietly. Stewart continued to be admired publicly. The audience never saw the tension, never sensed the difference. But beneath the surface, in the space where private thoughts are kept and not shared, Carson's judgment remained steady, shaped by what he believed he had seen and what he could no longer ignore. Could there be other specific events that turned into a professional disagreement between Johnny Carson and another influential man? Let's learn more. A clash of pride and power. The Carson-Sinatra conflict. There is said to have been a long and personal problem between Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra. Both men were very famous in American entertainment. On television, they often acted polite to each other. They smiled, joked, and appeared friendly. But behind this public image, there were serious disagreements that never really went away. At that time, Johnny Carson was the main host of The Tonight Show. He was one of the most powerful people in late-night TV. Many stars wanted to appear on his show because it could boost their fame. Carson had control over what the public saw, and he helped shape how people viewed celebrities. Frank Sinatra was also very powerful, but in a different way. He was known all over the world as The Voice. He was a top singer and had strong friends in the entertainment world. Many people respected him deeply. He was not just a performer. He was also seen as someone with influence in many places in the industry. The problem between the two men is said to have started after one of Carson's comedy jokes. During one of his opening talks on his show, Carson made a joke that touched on Sinatra's private life and the people he was linked with. This was a sensitive topic for Sinatra, and it made him very angry. After the show aired, people from the TV network contacted Carson. They told him Sinatra was upset and wanted a public apology on air. The request was serious because Sinatra was an important figure, and the network did not want trouble with him. Carson thought about it, but he refused to apologize. He believed that as a comedian, he had the right to make jokes. He felt that if he started saying sorry for jokes, then his freedom as a host would be weak. This decision made the situation worse. Sinatra saw this refusal as disrespect. After that, he stopped appearing on The Tonight Show. This was a big loss for Carson's program because Sinatra was a major guest who brought in viewers. His absence also affected the show's popularity in some circles. Not long after, Sinatra also shared his disappointment with others in the entertainment world. Some people close to him began to avoid Carson's show. This created quiet distance between Carson and certain industry figures who respected Sinatra. Sinatra later started appearing on other talk shows instead. Many people saw this as a message. It looked like he was showing that he was unhappy with Carson and wanted to move away from him. This made the gap between them even wider. Carson, however, still respected Sinatra in some ways. Because of this, the situation also affected him personally, not just professionally. It was not only about TV ratings or guests. It also felt like a personal rejection. There was an attempt to fix things in 1974. Carson met Sinatra at a private gathering in Las Vegas. Carson tried to talk to him calmly and settle the issue. He hoped they could move past the conflict, but the meeting did not go well. Sinatra spoke harshly to Carson in front of others. He made personal comments that caused embarrassment. The situation became worse instead of better. Later, at a public charity event, Sinatra again made remarks about Carson in front of many people. Carson did not respond, but he was clearly affected. These moments made the conflict deeper and more painful. After these events, Carson became more careful on his show. He decided that no jokes or comments about Sinatra would be allowed. Even indirect mentions were avoided. He wanted to prevent any more problems. People around Carson noticed this change. It showed that he was being very careful, not only for business reasons, but also because of personal feelings. Sinatra's name became something he avoided completely. Sinatra also had his own problems during this period. The entertainment world was changing, and new stars were rising. Some people felt his influence was not as strong as before. This made him more sensitive to criticism and rumors. In the end, the conflict between Carson and Sinatra stayed unresolved. Both men were strong, proud, and careful about their image. Neither wanted to back down or admit fault. Because of this, the distance between them remained for a long time. So, what specific encounters led Johnny Carson to struggle with guests whose need for control and attention began to disrupt the balance of his own show? Let's delve deeper. Control, ego, and the struggle for attention. During his long and very demanding years in television, Johnny Carson was placed in a position where he had to deal with many powerful personalities. Night after night, he sat across from guests who were admired by millions. On the surface, everything looked smooth, friendly, and easy. The audience saw laughter, charm, and effortless conversation. But behind that calm surface, the working environment was not always as simple as it seemed. One of the figures often linked to this tension was Milton Berle. He was already a big name, someone who had built a strong reputation in the early days of television. Because of that, he carried himself with a level of confidence that sometimes crossed into control. When he appeared on the show, the usual balance between host and guest would slowly begin to shift. Instead of following the natural flow of conversation, he often pushed himself into the center of everything. This need to be seen and heard did not happen once or twice. It appeared again and again. He would interrupt at moments that were meant for others. He would step into conversations that were not directed at him. In many cases, what should have been a shared space slowly turned into a one-person performance. For the host, this created a quiet struggle. There was a need to keep the show running smoothly while also trying not to openly challenge a well-known figure. The situation did not stop when the cameras were off. In backstage areas, the same pattern continued. There were reports that he moved freely into spaces meant for preparation, often without warning. Dressing rooms, work areas, and quiet spaces were not always respected. Instead, they became places where he could continue to speak, perform, and hold attention. For staff members who were trying to do their jobs, this created interruptions and pressure. Another issue that appeared in these accounts involved creative work. It was suggested that younger performers sometimes felt uneasy around him. Their ideas, especially jokes, were not always safe from being repeated elsewhere. This created a sense of imbalance. Those with less power felt exposed, while those with more influence remained protected. For a host who valued fairness in the creative process, this kind of behavior was difficult to ignore. At its core, the situation reflected a deeper issue. There was a strong fear of being overlooked, of losing relevance in a fast-changing industry. That fear, whether spoken or not, seemed to push certain actions. The desire to remain important, to stay visible, and to keep control often led to behavior that affected others in negative ways. Over time, this pattern became clear. For Johnny Carson, managing such moments required patience and careful control. He could not allow the show to fall apart, yet he also had to protect the structure that made it work. This meant holding back reactions, choosing words carefully, and sometimes allowing behavior that he personally disagreed with. The goal was always to keep the program moving forward, even when the situation behind the scenes became difficult. What stands out most in this chapter is not just one person's actions, but the wider picture. It shows how power, fame, and fear can mix together. It shows how a strong desire for attention can slowly take over professional behavior. And it shows how those in leadership roles must often carry the burden of keeping everything together, even when things begin to slip out of balance. How did things become even more complicated for Johnny Carson when he had to deal with personalities whose behavior off-camera began to affect the comfort and respect of everyone around them? Stay tuned for more image, behavior, and the hidden cost of fame. As the years continued, Johnny Carson encountered another type of challenge, one that was less about taking control of the stage and more about how individuals treated the people around them. This pattern became clear in his interactions with Burt Reynolds, a man who was widely admired and seen as a symbol of confidence and charm during his time. On screen, everything appeared polished. He was relaxed, confident, and entertaining. The audience responded well to his presence. But behind the scenes, a different picture was described. There was a strong focus on personal image, one that went beyond simple preparation. Time and energy were spent making sure every detail of appearance was just right. Small issues could quickly become large problems if they affected how he was seen. This focus on image was not only about looks. It also extended to how conversations were handled. Discussions often returned to personal stories, achievements, and experiences. While this could be engaging at times, it also made it difficult for others to share the space. Interviews became less about exchange and more about presentation. There were also concerns about how others were treated, especially in situations that required respect and balance. Some interactions, particularly with female guests, were described as uncomfortable. Comments and actions that were meant to be humorous did not always feel appropriate in a professional setting. This created moments where the host had to step in quietly, guiding the conversation away from tension without drawing attention to it. In addition, there were situations where humor crossed into embarrassment. Acts performed for laughter did not always consider the feelings of others involved. While the audience might respond with amusement, the experience for those on the receiving end could be very different. This created a gap between what was seen and what was felt. Another pattern that appeared was resistance to correction. When questions were raised or facts were challenged, the response was often defensive. Instead of adjusting or accepting another view, the focus would return to maintaining control of the narrative. This made honest conversation more difficult and added another layer of tension to the interaction. Looking at these experiences as a whole, a larger pattern becomes clear. Fame created a protective layer around certain individuals. That layer allowed behavior that might not be accepted in other settings. It created distance between public image and private conduct. To the audience, everything appeared smooth and enjoyable. Behind the scenes, the reality was more complicated. For Johnny Carson, these repeated experiences shaped a deeper understanding of the industry. He began to see that charm and talent did not always reflect character. He saw how power could influence behavior, and how difficult it could be to challenge that behavior without consequences. In the end, this chapter is not only about one person. It is about a system where image often matters more than truth. It is about how success can sometimes hide flaws instead of correcting them. If the earlier stories already hinted at cracks behind the polished image, what happens when those cracks widen and the truth becomes harder to ignore? Let's take a closer look. Controlled image and difficult realities. Reports from people who worked closely with Johnny Carson continue to describe a quiet but very real tension that existed behind the bright lights of his show. On the surface, everything looked smooth, calm, and friendly. Guests smiled, the audience laughed, and the conversation seemed natural. But behind that calm and easy appearance, things were often very different, and in some cases, very uncomfortable. One of the most talked about situations involved Joan Crawford. To viewers at home, she appeared graceful, polished, and completely in control. She carried herself with a kind of quiet power that made her seem almost untouchable. But according to those who worked around her, that calm image did not always match what happened behind closed doors. Her arrival alone created pressure. Every small detail had to be correct. The lighting had to be just right. The room had to feel exactly the way she wanted. Even the smallest change could cause tension. And that meant staff had to move carefully and slowly, always trying not to make a mistake. What stood out the most, however, was not just the demands, but how she treated people. Those who held important positions were treated with respect, even warmth. But those in lower roles did not always receive the same treatment. There were moments when her reaction to small mistakes became harsh and very direct. A simple error could quickly turn into something much bigger, leaving the person involved feeling embarrassed and shaken. This created an atmosphere where people were not relaxed, but instead cautious and alert. At the same time, there was a noticeable shift when the cameras turned on. Her expression softened, her tone changed, and everything became controlled again. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Then, as soon as filming paused, that warmth faded just as quickly. Staff began to see a pattern, one that made it difficult to know which version of her was real. This contrast stayed in people's minds long after the show ended. A different kind of challenge appeared with Orson Welles. He was known for his intelligence and strong presence, and audiences found him interesting and engaging. But behind the scenes, things were not always easy. He often did not follow the usual structure of the show. Questions that had been prepared ahead of time were sometimes dismissed, leaving the host to adjust in the moment without guidance. This made the process more difficult than it needed to be. Instead of a smooth and planned conversation, things became uncertain and unpredictable. Time was also an issue. The show followed a strict schedule, but he did not always follow the signals that it was time to stop or move on. His behavior toward staff also caused concern. Instead of speaking directly to them, he sometimes spoke about them as if they were not present. This made communication less clear and, at times, uncomfortable. There were even moments when he attempted to take control of how the show was being filmed, offering direction to camera operators and stepping outside his role as a guest. All of these actions added up slowly over time. While his talent was clear, the difficulty of working around his approach became something the team could not ignore. It created a situation where every appearance required extra effort, extra patience, and careful management just to keep things on track. In both cases, the same pattern began to show. The public saw polished, impressive figures, but those working behind the scenes experienced something much more complex. The difference between what was shown and what was felt became hard to overlook, and it left a lasting impression on everyone involved. If some guests already push patience with control and ego, what happens when the behavior becomes even more demanding, disruptive, and harder to manage behind the scenes? Let's find out. Tension, boundaries, and demanding presence. As more accounts continued to surface, it became clear that these challenges were not limited to just a few individuals. Several other guests also brought situations that tested the patience and professionalism of everyone involved. Each case was different, but the effect was often the same. The atmosphere behind the scenes became tense, uncertain, and at times very difficult to manage. One such example involved Bette Davis. She was known for her strong personality and sharp way of speaking, and on screen, this often made her entertaining to watch. But off camera, that same energy could become overwhelming. During group appearances, she did not always allow others to share the moment. Interruptions were common, and conversations often shifted back toward her. This created an uneven balance, especially for younger or less experienced guests. Instead of a shared conversation, the space became controlled by one voice. Behind the scenes, things could become even more intense. There were moments when her comments toward staff crossed into harsh territory, leaving people feeling uncomfortable or singled out. In one situation, her behavior became strong enough that it required direct attention, something that rarely happened. Even though her talent was respected, the repeated tension made her presence more difficult over time. The effort needed to manage each appearance became something the team had to consider carefully. With Mickey Rooney, the concerns took a different form. His energy was high and his personality was lively, but this did not always translate well in a professional setting. There were repeated reports of behavior that crossed personal boundaries, especially with female staff members. Actions that may have been brushed off in another time were no longer acceptable, and this created discomfort. Staff members began to feel uneasy when they knew he would be present. Some even tried to avoid working near him when possible. In addition to this, there were moments when his condition raised concerns. At times, his speech and focus suggested that he was not fully in control, which made live appearances harder to manage. These situations required careful handling. The goal was always to keep the show running smoothly, but it became clear that extra steps were needed to prevent problems. Over time, adjustments were made to reduce risk and maintain order. Then there was Zsa Zsa Gabor, whose presence brought a completely different kind of challenge. She was lively, glamorous, and entertaining, and audiences enjoyed her personality. But behind the scenes, her expectations were extremely detailed and very specific. Nothing could be slightly wrong. Everything had to be exactly as she wanted it. This included the environment, the setup, and even the smallest personal preferences. If something was not right, delays followed, production slowed down, and schedules shifted. What should have been simple became complicated. Meeting these demands required time, energy, and constant attention. Staff had to move quickly while still being careful, trying to avoid mistakes that could cause further delays. Over time, this created a sense of exhaustion. The effort needed to manage each visit became larger than expected. Looking at all these situations together, a clear pattern begins to form. The challenges were not always loud or obvious at first. Instead, they built slowly through repeated actions, small moments, and ongoing tension. Each guest brought something different, but the result was often the same. The smooth and polished image seen by viewers did not always match the reality behind the scenes. What do you think about Johnny Carson and his show? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for staying with us as we uncovered these behind-the-scenes stories from Johnny Carson's world and the tension between public fame and private behavior. If this look into Hollywood's hidden side kept you engaged, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to discover more stories. See you there.